When a rescue shelter's German Shepherd went into labor, everyone prepared to witness a miracle. After weeks of careful attention, she finally gave birth. But something shocking happened. What emerged were not typical puppies. Their size, their peculiar fur texture, even the faint sounds they made, everything seemed incorrect. The vet's hands trembled as she examined the newborns, immediately realizing something was terribly wrong. Within minutes, the room fell silent, and whispers spread, "These aren't puppies. What had the dog just delivered? And why did the vet suddenly demand that everyone leave the room? What she uncovered that night would change everything and leave everyone in tears. Stay until the end. The truth will leave you speechless." Before we start, please be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. Also, I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far the Furry Protector Diaries stories travel. The arrival of Grace, the cold wind howled outside as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the shelter gates. Inside, the staff prepared to close for the night when the sound of tires screeching broke the silence. A small, rusty pickup truck pulled up, and a man stepped out quickly, his face pale and distressed. Without much explanation, he opened the back door, and that's when they saw her. A German Shepherd lay curled on a torn blanket, her breathing shallow, her fur matted with mud. Her ribs were visible through her coat, and her eyes, those deep amber eyes, spoke of pain and exhaustion. But beneath that, there was something else, a quiet, desperate plea for help. The man whispered, "Found her by the highway. She wouldn't move. I think she's pregnant." The shelter manager, Linda, immediately called for assistance. "Get a stretcher and call Dr. Harris now," she ordered. 2 volunteers rushed over, their movements careful yet swift. As they lifted the trembling dog, a low whine escaped her throat, a sound so soft and heart-wrenching that even the toughest worker paused. Inside the shelter's medical room, the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Dr. Harris arrived minutes later, his brow furrowed as he knelt beside the new arrival. "Easy, girl," he murmured gently, placing a hand on her head. Her eyes darted toward him, fearful yet trusting. A quick examination confirmed it. She was indeed pregnant and very close to giving birth. "She's severely malnourished," Dr. Harris muttered. "We'll have to stabilize her tonight. She's been through hell." Linda nodded, stroking the dog's back. "We'll name her Grace," she said softly. "Because after what she survived, that's exactly what she embodies." The room grew quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of her breathing. Volunteers gathered around, offering blankets and soft words of comfort. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Grace closed her eyes, not in fear, but in relief. She was finally safe. Or so everyone thought. Outside, the wind howled again, carrying a faint echo that made Dr. Harris pause. He couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue was different, that this dog, this mother, had brought with her a mystery no one was ready to uncover. The unsettling vigil the first night after Grace's rescue was eerily quiet. The shelter usually hummed with the comforting sounds of animals settling in, soft barks, meows, and the gentle rustle of hay. But around Grace's enclosure, there was only silence. She lay curled on her blanket, her head resting on her paws, her amber eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for someone or something. Linda checked on her every hour. "She hasn't eaten," she said to Dr. Harris, frowning. "Not even water." Dr. Harris crouched beside the kennel and spoke softly. "Grace, it's all right now. You're safe here." But the dog didn't move. Her ears twitched slightly, her gaze still locked on the shadowy hallway. Then, out of nowhere, she let out a deep growl, low, warning, protective. Dr. Harris glanced toward the corridor, but nothing was there. "She's sensing something," he murmured. "Either she's still on edge, or she knows something we don't." By morning, her behavior had grown even stranger. When volunteers tried to clean her enclosure, Grace would block the corner of her kennel, growling softly whenever anyone came too close. She seemed to be guarding an empty patch of blanket, her body tense and alert. "She acts like she's hiding her pups," said Mia, one of the volunteers, "but she hasn't given birth yet." That night, the shelter's security cameras flickered. The old wiring often caused interference, but what happened next made Linda uneasy. The footage showed Grace pacing back and forth before suddenly stopping. Her ears perked, nose lifted, tail stiff. Then she began to whine, pressing her body against the metal bars as if trying to reach someone beyond them. At dawn, Linda found Grace wide awake, still staring at the same spot by the door. Her food remained untouched again. She didn't sleep at all, Linda whispered, rubbing her arms against the chill. What could she be waiting for? Dr. Harris reviewed her blood work and found nothing abnormal. Physically, she's fine, he said. But there's something psychological here. Trauma, fear, maybe instinct, he sighed deeply. Still, this level of alertness, it's not normal. That evening, as the shelter lights dimmed, Grace began to dig at her blanket. Her breathing quickened, and she let out soft whimpers that echoed through the halls. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. Linda approached the kennel carefully, her heart pounding. Grace turned her head, eyes glistening under the faint light. Then she barked once, sharp, desperate, and filled with warning. It was the kind of sound that made every hair stand on end. Something was coming. The birth and the revelation thunder rolled across the sky as dark clouds gathered above the shelter. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the kennels in a ghostly glow. Most of the animals had fallen silent, sensing the storm's approach, but not Grace. She paced in circles, her breathing heavy, her tail stiff with anxiety. Every few seconds, she'd glance toward the door as if waiting for something unseen. Linda, working late, noticed her restless movements on the security monitor. "She's getting worse," she muttered, grabbing her raincoat before heading toward the medical room. When she opened the door, a sharp bark echoed through the corridor, Grace's warning cry. But this time, it wasn't anger. It was pain. "Dr. Harris!" Linda shouted. Within minutes, the vet rushed in, his hair damp from the storm outside. One look at Grace, and his expression turned serious. "She's going into labor," he said. "It's too soon." They quickly set up a clean station with blankets, towels, and sterile instruments. Grace lay down, trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Linda knelt beside her, gently stroking. Harris leaned closer, his joy turned to confusion. His eyes narrowed as he gently lifted the newborn with a towel. "Wait," he whispered. The shape wasn't right. The fur was darker, shorter, and the body felt unusually heavy. He carefully examined it under the light and froze. "This doesn't look like a puppy." Linda blinked, her smile fading. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, Grace let out another strained cry, another contraction. One after another, more newborns arrived, but each looked the same. None of them resembled typical puppies. They were silent, motionless for a few seconds, then squirmed faintly, their movements unsettlingly synchronized. Lightning flashed again, throwing eerie shadows across the walls. Dr. Harris exchanged a look with Linda, his face pale. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Grace let out a soft whimper, curling her body protectively around the strange litter. Her eyes glistened with tears as she nuzzled them one by one. Linda stepped back, her voice trembling. "What? What are they?" Dr. Harris couldn't answer. He only stared, the thunder outside echoing his dread. "I don't know," he whispered. "But whatever they are, they're not puppies." The unnatural litters the room was thick with tension. Only the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan broke the silence as Dr. Harris leaned closer to the table, his gloved hands trembling slightly. The newborns, if that's what they were, lay huddled together beneath a warm lamp. Their bodies were small, but there was something undeniably off about them. Their limbs were shorter, their fur unusually dense and charcoal gray, and their breathing was barely audible. Linda swallowed hard. "Are they even alive?" she whispered. Dr. Harris pressed a stethoscope gently against one of the tiny chests. "Yes," he murmured. "Their hearts are beating, but slow, much slower than normal puppies." He reached for a small flashlight. His brow furrowed as he examined the first one's face. The features were strange. Its nose was flat, its ears underdeveloped, and when he lifted its paw, he saw faint sharp ridges where nails should have been. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "I've never seen anything like this." Grace whimpered softly, curling her body protectively around the strange litter. Her eyes darted between Dr. Harris and Linda, filled with fear, but also fierce determination. It was as if she knew they were different and didn't care. These were her babies. Linda hesitated, her voice shaking. Could it be a deformity? Maybe from malnutrition or trauma? Dr. Harris shook his head. No, this is beyond that. Their bone structure feels different. He reached for a sterile cloth, carefully cleaning one of the newborn's faces. The tiny creature let out a low, unfamiliar squeal, not quite a bark, not quite a whine. It was haunting. Lightning flashed outside, momentarily lighting the room. Dr. Harris exhaled sharply. I need to run tests. Blood work, tissue samples, everything. But we can't move them yet. Grace growled at the mention of tests. Her body tensed, lips pulling back slightly as she shielded the litter with her body. Linda stepped forward cautiously. Easy, girl. No one's going to hurt them. But Dr. Harris couldn't ignore the knowing feeling in his gut. Linda, he whispered, glancing at her with unease. Something's not right here. Their physiology, it's almost as if they've been altered. Altered, she repeated, her eyes widening. He nodded grimly. Genetically. I've seen this kind of thing before, years ago when I worked near the research district. Some labs experimented on animals for hybrid resistance and immunity trials. They shut down after public backlash, but... He trailed off, staring at the newborns. These markings, their breathing pattern, it all fits. Thunder rumbled again, shaking the shelter walls. Grace whimpered, licking her young as if sensing danger. Linda whispered, You think she escaped from one of those labs? Dr. Harris didn't respond. His silence was answer enough. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, as lightning lit the room once more, one of the newborns slowly opened its eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. Dr. Harris froze, his heart hammering in his chest. Dear God, he whispered. What have they done to you? The shelter's secret by morning, the storm had passed, but the unease inside the shelter only grew stronger. Whispers spread quickly among the staff. No one knew exactly what had happened in the medical room, but everyone sensed it wasn't ordinary. Grace's kennel had been sealed off overnight, her strange litter kept under constant observation. Linda stood at the reception desk, nervously tapping her pen. We can't keep this from the others much longer, she said. Dr. Harris, exhausted from a sleepless night, rubbed his temples. We have to, he replied firmly, until we understand what we're dealing with. But the rumors had already taken root. One volunteer claimed she'd seen the newborns glowing under the heat lamp. Another swore she heard one of them hiss instead of whine. Fear had started to spread like wildfire. When Dr. Harris entered the main hall, conversation died instantly. Dozens of uneasy eyes followed him as he walked past. Everyone, please remain calm, he said, trying to sound composed. The German Shepherd, Grace, gave birth prematurely. The pups are unique but stable. No one is in danger. The silence that followed said otherwise. Unique, someone muttered. That's not what I heard. Are they even dogs? Another whispered. Dr. Harris's patience thinned. Enough, he said sharply. They're under observation. No one goes near that room without permission. Meanwhile, Grace lay quietly in her enclosure, her body curled protectively around her litter. Her eyes followed every movement outside the glass. When a janitor accidentally dropped a mop nearby, Grace growled, a deep, rumbling warning that sent shivers down his spine. Doc, Linda whispered later that afternoon. This can't go on. The others are scared. Even the animals are restless. Indeed, the cats refused to eat, and several dogs barked relentlessly whenever they passed Grace's kennel. The entire shelter felt charged with invisible tension. Dr. Harris sighed heavily. I'll move her to the isolation wing. Less noise, fewer eyes. By evening, Grace was carefully transferred to a small, dimly lit room at the far end of the building, an area once used for quarantined animals. The air was colder there, the flickering light barely enough to chase away the shadows. As the door locked behind them, Grace lifted her head. Her ears twitched, her body stiffened. For a moment, she let out a low, trembling whine, as if warning them all that moving her was a mistake. Outside, Dr. Harris turned to Linda. No one enters that room unless I'm present, he said firmly. Whatever's happening, it's only beginning. The surgical scars the next morning, the isolation wing was colder than usual. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the empty corridor as Dr. Harris entered, a clipboard in one hand and a coffee in the other. He hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours, but curiosity and fear kept him awake. Linda followed quietly, clutching a file filled with Grace's medical records. Grace lifted her head the moment he stepped inside. Her golden eyes were sharp, alert. She didn't bark or growl this time, but her body tensed, muscles rippling beneath her coat. She watched him with cautious distrust, as if she knew he was about to do something she wouldn't like. "Easy, girl," Dr. Harris said softly, crouching low. "I'm not here to hurt them." He moved toward the incubator where the newborns lay. There were 6 of them, small, gray, and still unnervingly quiet. Normally, puppies their age would squirm and yelp, but these ones only made faint rhythmic sounds, almost like coordinated breathing. It was too synchronized to be natural. He began his examination methodically. "Temperature stable," he murmured, writing notes. "Heart rate slower than expected. Respiration, steady but shallow." When he tried to lift one of the pups, Grace growled softly, her tail stiff. Linda knelt beside her, whispering gently, "It's all right, Grace. He's helping." Under the examination light, Dr. Harris studied the pup's body closely. There were tiny scars near the neck, barely visible, but symmetrical. "Look at this," he said quietly, motioning for Linda to come closer. "These aren't natural marks. They're surgical." Linda's hand flew to her mouth. "You mean someone operated on them?" "Before birth," he replied grimly. "In utero modification. This is advanced work." He carefully drew a blood sample, placing it into a small vial. The liquid shimmered faintly under the light, darker than usual, almost metallic. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Animal blood shouldn't look like that." Grace's growl deepened. She nudged the incubator gently with her nose, pulling it closer to her. Her breathing quickened as if she could sense the growing danger. Dr. Harris leaned closer to one of the newborns, shining his penlight across its eyes. The pupils contracted slowly, then glowed faintly blue for a fraction of a second. He froze. "Linda, did you see that?" She nodded, pale as chalk. "What are they?" Before he could answer, one of the newborns emitted a strange vibration, a low, harmonic hum that filled the small room. The glass of the incubator trembled. Grace immediately moved between the pups and the humans, barking once, sharp and defensive. The noise stopped. Silence returned, but the air felt charged. Dr. Harris slowly lowered his penlight, his heart hammering. He turned to Linda, his voice low and tight. "We're not dealing with nature here. Someone made these." Linda whispered, trembling. "Made them for what?" Dr. Harris looked at the pups again, then at Grace, who watched him with wary, intelligent eyes. "For something we were never meant to find." Project E9 the following night, sleep was impossible. Dr. Harris sat in his office, the rain tapping softly against the windows, his mind replaying the image of the glowing eyes. He'd worked with animals for 20 years, yet nothing had ever chilled him like that. Curiosity and dread tangled inside him, pushing him back toward the isolation wing long after everyone else had gone home. The shelter was silent, the corridors dimly lit. As he entered the room, Grace immediately stirred. Her ears perked, eyes alert. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "Just one more check." She didn't growl this time, but she didn't relax either. She kept her gaze fixed on him, her tail low, but tense. The newborns were asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling in eerie unison. Dr. Harris switched on a small lamp and began examining each one carefully, determined to find answers. He lifted the third pup gently, running his fingers along its side, and then he felt it. Something small and hard was embedded beneath the skin near its shoulder. He frowned, pressing lightly. The shape was unmistakable. "What on earth?" he muttered. Fetching a sterilized scalpel, he made a careful incision no wider than a thread. A drop of metallic blood oozed out, and then a small silver disc glinted under the light. He froze. Linda, who had quietly entered behind him, gasped. "What is that?" Dr. Harris carefully extracted the object with tweezers and placed it on a tray. It was a microchip unlike any he had seen. Instead of a standard ID serial, it bore an engraved emblem, Project E9, and a small sequence of numbers beneath. "Project E9, he whispered, his throat dry. The name tugged at something buried deep in his memory. Years ago, before he joined the shelter, he'd heard rumors about a covert research program experimenting on animals to create hybrids resistant to disease, radiation, even extreme temperatures. The program had supposedly been shut down. Supposedly. Linda's voice shook. "You think she was part of that project?" Dr. Harris looked at Grace, who was now sitting upright, eyes fixed on the chip. Her ears twitched as though she recognized the metallic scent. No, he said quietly. She wasn't part of it. She escaped it. Grace let out a low whine and nudged one of her pups closer to her chest. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, like memory. Dr. Harris stared at the chip, the engraved numbers reflecting off the lamp's glow. If this came from a government lab, he murmured, then we're in serious danger. Outside, thunder rolled once again, soft but foreboding. And for the first time, Dr. Harris truly realized this was no ordinary birth. It was the beginning of something no one was meant to see. The traceable passed the next morning. The shelter was unusually quiet. The volunteers worked with nervous glances, their whispers echoing faintly down the hallways. Word of Grace's strange litter had spread, and everyone seemed to sense something was terribly wrong. Dr. Harris sat in his office, the mysterious microchip resting on a cloth beside his computer. The engraved words, Project E9, haunted him. Linda entered, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. "You've been here all night," she said softly. He nodded without looking up. "I ran the serial number on the chip through every animal registry I know. Local, national, even private lab networks. Nothing." She frowned. "So, it's untraceable?" "Almost," he murmured. "Except for one thing." He turned the chip under the light, showing her a faded logo stamped near the corner, a stylized H inside a hexagon. "Helios Research," he said. "A biotech facility outside town. It was shut down 8 years ago after animal rights violations." Linda's eyes widened. "I remember that name. Weren't they the ones who tested cross-species DNA therapy? They were trying to engineer immune systems capable of resisting any known disease," he finished grimly. "They claimed it was for medical breakthroughs. But the animals they used suffered horribly." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It seems Grace was one of them." He clicked through archived files on his computer, finally pulling up a declassified report. Grainy images filled the screen, cages, lab dogs with shaved fur, and cold metal tables lined with labeled specimens. Each photo bore a date and code, E9A through E9G. Linda covered her mouth. "Oh God." Dr. Harris scrolled further until he found a familiar face, a German shepherd with piercing amber eyes marked E9F. "That's her," he whispered. "Grace." According to the file, the subjects of Project E9 were exposed to experimental gene splicing intended to enhance resilience, intelligence, and adaptive instincts. The project was shut down after a fire destroyed part of the facility. The official report listed all test animals as deceased, but clearly one had survived. Linda sank into a chair, her hands trembling. She must have escaped during the fire and survived on her own all these years. Dr. Harris nodded slowly. "And now she's given birth to something carrying that same genetic imprint." He stood and stared out the window, watching the rain drizzle against the glass. "If the government learns about this, they'll come for her, for the pups. They won't see them as living beings, just data." Grace's soft whine echoed faintly from the isolation wing, as if she somehow understood the gravity of what they were uncovering. Linda turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" Dr. Harris looked down at the file one last time before closing it. "We protect them," he said firmly. "No matter what it costs." Outside, lightning flashed across the gray morning sky, and with it, the storm around Grace's past had only just begun. A mother's hope by the second day after Grace's birth, the shelter no longer felt like a place of rescue. It felt like a secret. Everyone was too afraid to speak aloud. Tension hung thick in the air, an invisible weight pressing on every heart. Volunteers who once smiled while feeding the animals now avoided Grace's corridor entirely. Even the dogs barked uneasily whenever her scent drifted through the vents. Linda stood in the break room, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug that had long gone cold. Across from her, 2 volunteers whispered urgently. "I'm telling you, those things aren't normal," one said. "They don't cry. They don't eat like regular puppies." "It's wrong." Linda slammed the mug down, startling them. "They're just babies," she snapped. "They didn't ask for any of this." "But what if they're dangerous?" the younger volunteer asked, her eyes wide. "What if they grow up?" "Enough," Linda said firmly, cutting her off. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the same fear. What if they were dangerous? What if the scientists had made something that wasn't meant to exist? Meanwhile, in the isolation room, Grace lay with her litter pressed close to her chest. She hadn't eaten much, but her strength was returning. Her eyes followed every shadow, every sound. When Dr. Harris entered, she didn't growl anymore. She only watched him with silent caution. He sat on a stool, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "You didn't ask for this either, did you?" he murmured. "You just wanted peace." Grace tilted her head slightly as if understanding. Linda entered quietly behind him, holding a tray of food. "The staff are scared," she whispered. "Some of them want to call animal control." Dr. Harris looked up sharply. "They can't. If they do, the wrong people will hear. Those labs, those same people might still be out there." He stood, his voice tightening. "And if they find out she's alive, they'll take her back." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "So, what are we supposed to do? Keep them hidden forever?" Dr. Harris exhaled slowly. "Maybe just long enough for me to find out who's behind Project E9. Until then, we protect them." A silence stretched between them. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the corridor, painting the shelter in shades of orange and fear. Linda finally spoke, her voice trembling. "The others may see monsters," she said softly. "But I see a mother fighting for her children." Dr. Harris nodded. "And that's exactly why we can't let the world take them." Grace looked up at them, her golden eyes glistening. For a fleeting second, the fear in the room seemed to fade, replaced by something deeper, hope. The agency's arrival began with a phone call. Early that morning, as the sun crept weakly through the blinds, the shelter's landline rang. Linda picked up expecting a routine inquiry about adoptions. But the voice on the other end wasn't a potential pet owner. It was cold, official, and direct. "Dr. Harris, please," the man said. "This is Agent Keller from the Department of Agricultural and Biotechnical Affairs. We've received an anonymous tip about an unregistered animal birth involving potential biohazard indicators. We're sending a team to your facility immediately." Linda froze. "Wait, how did you?" But the line went dead. Her heart pounded as she ran to Dr. Harris's office. He looked up from his desk, instantly reading the panic on her face. "They know," she said breathlessly. "Someone told them." Dr. Harris's face paled. "No one here would." He stopped mid-sentence. Outside, the low rumble of engines filled the air. Black vans pulled up to the shelter gates, their tinted windows gleaming under the pale morning light. Men in dark uniforms stepped out, their jackets marked Biosecurity Unit. The shelter erupted into chaos. Volunteers gathered in confusion as the agents fanned out, flashing badges and sealed documents. "We've received reports of genetically modified specimens on this property," Agent Keller announced. His tone left no room for argument. "All animals are to be secured for examination." Dr. Harris stepped forward, blocking the corridor. "You can't just barge in here. These are rescue animals, not experiments." Keller's expression was flat. "That depends on what we find." He motioned to two agents. "Isolation wing now." Linda's stomach dropped. She and Dr. Harris exchanged a terrified glance before rushing down the hallway ahead of them. Grace sensed something immediately. The moment the boots echoed near her door, she stood, growling low, her body shielding the pups. The agents pushed past them, raising their scanners toward the incubator. The devices beeped instantly, loud, rhythmic, undeniable. "Confirmed anomalous genetic signatures," one of them said. "Level 3 classification." Keller turned sharply to Harris. "Where did these animals come from?" "They were rescued," he said, voice trembling. "From the streets." "We didn't know." "That's not what our data says," Keller cut in coldly. "These identifiers match records from a discontinued program. Project E9. Grace barked fiercely, the sound echoing through the narrow hall. The agents flinched, startled. "Sedate her," Keller ordered. "No," Linda shouted, stepping forward. But before the agents could act, Grace lunged, not to attack, but to protect. Her growl reverberated like thunder. For the first time, fear flickered in Keller's eyes. Dr. Harris stood frozen as chaos broke out around him, realizing too late that the secret they tried to keep hidden had just become a matter of national interest, and Grace's fight had only just begun. The escape the room exploded into motion. Agents shouted orders. The echo of boots striking tile reverberated through the narrow hallway. Grace's bark shook the walls, deep, primal, protective. Her fur bristled as she stood between her newborns and the men advancing toward her kennel with tranquilizer rifles. "Stand down," Dr. Harris yelled, his voice cracking under the chaos. "You'll only make her worse." But Agent Keller didn't flinch. "That animal is aggressive and classified," he barked. "Neutralize her before someone gets hurt." Grace's growl deepened, a low rumble that made even the agents hesitate. Her eyes, bright and wild, darted between her pups and the intruders. Every instinct in her body screamed that they meant harm. She backed toward the incubator, nudging her babies closer to the wall, her trembling form a shield of pure courage. Dr. Harris stepped forward, blocking Keller's aim. "Please, she's not violent. She's terrified. Let me handle this." But Keller was unmoved. "Move aside, doctor." Linda's voice broke through, sharp with emotion. "You're pointing guns at a mother protecting her newborns." One of the agents fired. The dart missed by inches, embedding in the wall. Grace barked ferociously, lunging forward, not to attack, but to drive them back. The sudden movement startled the team, sending one agent stumbling into a tray of instruments. Metal clattered across the floor, the sound piercing through the chaos like a warning siren. Grace took the chance. She grabbed one of her pups gently by the scruff and darted toward the side door of the isolation wing. "Stop her," Keller shouted, but it was too late. Linda had already pulled the emergency lever, triggering a lockdown delay. The steel doors hesitated for just a moment, enough for Grace to slip through. Dr. Harris's heart pounded as alarms blared. He turned to Keller, his voice trembling. "If you chase her, you'll kill her. Let me bring her back." Keller's jaw tightened. "You have 10 minutes before we initiate containment." Outside, rain began to fall again. The ground slick and dark. Grace sprinted across the yard, the pup clutched protectively in her jaws, her body moving with both strength and desperation. Lightning flashed above, illuminating her silhouette against the chain-link fence. Dr. Harris and Linda followed through the mud, calling out softly, "Grace, come back. You're safe." But she couldn't hear. But she didn't stop. Grace sprinted across the yard. The pup, small and gray, remained secure in her jaws, her maternal instinct overruling all fear. The chain-link fence at the back of the property, though tall, presented a barrier, but not an end. The dogs in the adjacent kennels barked hysterically, a chaotic chorus that mixed with the distant blaring of the shelter alarm. Dr. Harris and Linda watched in stunned silence from the isolation wing window. "The back fence," Linda yelled, pointing. "She's heading for the woods." Agent Keller burst through the door, his face a mask of cold fury. "Containment protocols are active. Seal the perimeter." He snatched a radio from a subordinate. "Unit 3, intercept a K-9 moving toward the east perimeter. Do not engage, but contain." Grace reached the fence line. It was thick wire mesh, sturdy and high. She dropped the pup carefully on the muddy ground and began to dig furiously near the base. Her paws moved with astonishing speed, tearing through the wet earth and roots. This was not the digging of a scared shelter dog, this was calculated, desperate effort. Dr. Harris looked at Keller. "She's moving on instinct. She won't harm the others. Let me talk her down." Keller ignored him. 10 minutes are up, doctor. We secure the assets." He turned to his men. "Non-lethal force authorized. We need the pups intact." Meanwhile, Linda was rushing through the break room, grabbing a heavy-duty bolt cutter from the maintenance closet. The agents were focused on the front gate and the isolation wing. She knew the perimeter fence was her only chance. She had to help Grace get out. Outside, Grace paused, letting out a low, urgent whimper toward the 5 newborns still inside the incubator. It was a sound of profound loss and commitment. Then, with a final tear of the wire mesh, she created an opening just big enough. She nudged her pup through first, then followed, her powerful body slipping into the dark, rain-soaked woods beyond. She was free but alone. Linda reached the fence, spotting the tear in the wire just as 2 agents rounded the corner, scanners held high. "Stop," one shouted. Linda dropped the bolt cutters and raised her hands, panting. "I was just checking the damage." The agent's scanner swept the hole. "The subject is through the fence. Perimeter is breached." The mother's message. Dr. Harris found himself locked back in the isolation room, watching the security feed. The shelter was swarming with agents, their movements systematic and invasive. They began carefully collecting the 5 remaining newborns, placing them in sterile, insulated containers. Their small, synchronized whines were the only sounds of protest. Keller entered, holding the blood vial Dr. Harris had drawn earlier. Metallic blood, doctor. Trace elements of synthetics and unknown biological markers. You knew what you had here. Dr. Harris stood his ground. I knew I had a mother and her babies, terrified and injured. Your project is inhumane, and these aren't assets, they are living beings. Keller smiled thinly. Emotions don't change genetics. This dog and her offspring are the product of unauthorized experimentation. They are state property now and highly valuable. They represent a medical revolution. He paused. You had 10 minutes to cooperate. Now you'll be detained for questioning. As 2 agents moved to seize him, Dr. Harris's gaze fell on Grace's vacated spot. On the wet, torn blanket, Grace had scraped something into the dirt floor of the kennel with her paw before escaping. It was a crude, shallow mark, but it was there. He knelt, feigning distress. Wait, what about the others? Did she injure them? As the agents hesitated, he quickly read the faint mark. It was not a random scrape. It was a stylized H, the same Helios Research logo stamped on the microchip. But beside it, Grace had added 3 specific claw marks, 2 long, parallel lines and 1 short, perpendicular dash. A sequence. Dr. Harris's mind raced. Could Grace, genetically enhanced and highly intelligent, have been communicating? He stood, looking at Keller. She didn't try to hurt anyone. She just wants her child protected. She needs professional care, not containment. Take him, Keller commanded. As Dr. Harris was led away, he repeated the claw mark sequence in his head. 2, 2, 1. It was too deliberate to be accidental. It was a code, a location, or a warning. Grace was out in the wilderness, injured, but she had left a message. He knew he had to find a way to escape detention and decipher her meaning, because the storm that had brought Grace to the shelter was nothing compared to the danger she was running toward. A new trail Dr. Harris was moved into a small, temporary holding room at the shelter's entrance. Outside, the vans were preparing to leave, taking Grace's remaining 5 pups with them. Linda was being questioned separately. He had to act fast. He looked around the room. A basic metal desk, 1 chair, and a phone mounted high on the wall, presumably monitored. He couldn't risk calling Linda or anyone outside. He focused on the code, 221. He began sorting through possibilities in his mind. A map coordinate? Unlikely, too simplistic. A door code / lockbox? Possible, but where? A frequency? Radios, old government vans. Then, it hit him. The declassified Project E9 file. The archived photos he'd seen earlier, the labeled specimens from Helios Research. He remembered seeing codes on the metal tags attached to the cages, E9A, E9B. E9F, Grace. The files were digitally indexed. He struggled against the bindings on his wrists. The agents had used plastic zip ties and managed to reach the desk's edge. Using the sharp metal corner, he began to saw the tough plastic slowly, silently. He finally broke free just as the lock clicked and Linda was pushed into the room. Her face was tear-streaked. They took them, document. They took all the babies. Not all of them, he whispered, showing her the frayed plastic ties. Grace is out there with 1, and she left us a message. He quickly drew the H symbol and the 221 sequence on a scrap of paper. I need to get to my computer, look up the Helios file indices. The old Helios records had cryptic labels. I bet this is a file number, a key to something hidden. Linda nodded, determination hardening her eyes. My car is parked down the street, away from the vans. I can cause a distraction at the main door. You go to your office, get the information, and you go find Grace. A moment later, they heard footsteps approaching. Time was up. Linda took a deep breath. Ready? Dr. Harris gave her a look of gratitude and fear. Go. Linda flung open the door and screamed, the main water line is ruptured in the kitchen. You need to send men immediately or the electrics will short. Chaos erupted down the hall as agents, fearing facility damage and a biosecurity breach, rushed toward the reported leak. Dr. Harris used the momentary distraction to slip down the service corridor toward his office, knowing the clock was ticking, and the fate of Grace and her surviving pup rested on his ability to decrypt her final, desperate message. Dr. Harris sprinted down the narrow service corridor toward his office. Linda's diversion, the false alarm about the ruptured water line, had bought him precious minutes, but he could already hear Agent Keller's furious shouts as the ruse was discovered. He reached his office, slammed the door shut, and locked it. His hands, still shaking, flew across the keyboard. He pulled up the archived Helios research files, the index numbers swimming before his eyes. He needed to find the correlation between the sequence 221 and the internal project codes. He searched through hundreds of file tags E9A, E9B, E9F, Grace's file, but none matched the pattern. 221. 2 long lines, 1 short line. It had to be a cipher. Then, he remembered the old database structure from the Helios facility, a rudimentary security measure from years ago. They didn't use standard numerical indexing for hidden files. They used a multi-layer coordinate system. He cross-referenced the sequence 221 with the 3 different classification layers in the Helios data index. Layer 1, locus index $2, layer 2, variant index $2, layer 3. Storage index $1. The search yielded a single, heavily encrypted file named L2, V2, S1, containment protocol/E9. He forced the decryption software to work, sacrificing precious seconds. The file flashed open. It was a secret contingency plan outlining a potential escape route and a final secure refuge for high-value assets in case of a full facility shutdown or breach. It contained a set of coordinates leading to a location miles away, deep in the inaccessible canyons bordering the old research district. Below the coordinates was a single note, cache E9. The old quarry. A sharp pounding began on his door. Dr. Harris. Open this door now. You are obstructing a federal investigation. Keller's voice was dangerously calm. Dr. Harris quickly copied the coordinates onto a small USB drive, shoving it into his pocket. He grabbed his medical bag, stuffing it with supplies, bandages, and an emergency sedative. I can't let them get her, he muttered. He knew the shelter floor plan by heart. He unlatched the heavy window in his office, it was an old building, and slipped out onto the narrow fire escape. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the darkness offered cover. Race against time, Dr. Harris slid down the fire escape, hitting the wet ground just as the glass of his office door shattered. He heard Agent Keller roar in frustrated anger. He didn't look back. He found Linda waiting for him near the back service vehicle ramp. She was pale but resolute. Go. I'll take them toward the maintenance shed. They won't know you left the property. Linda, come with me now. Someone needs to stay and fight this legally. I'll call my lawyer and the press. They'll shut down the pursuit, but you need to get Grace safe now. She pointed to the old highway access road. Go. With a final nod, Dr. Harris ran toward the tree line, leaving the sound of shouting agents behind him. He started his battered SUV, using the emergency 4x4 function to drive off-road until he reached the highway, heading straight for the coordinates. The drive was agonizing. The old quarry was hours away. He drove through the night, the image of Grace's amber eyes and the 6 small, strangely silent pups cycling through his mind. He wasn't just saving a dog, he was saving a mother from a government that saw her children as data. The reunion at the quarry, he arrived at the coordinates just as dawn broke, casting pale light over a desolate, rocky canyon. The old quarry was abandoned, surrounded by thick brush and forgotten equipment. He pulled out his flashlight and began the climb, calling out softly, Grace. Grace. He searched for nearly an hour. Just as despair started to set in, he saw movement near a small, collapsed mine shaft entrance. Curled tightly inside, partially shielded by a slab of rock, was Grace. She was exhausted, covered in mud, and visibly trembling, but she was alive. And nestled securely beneath her chin, small and dark against her gray coat, was the surviving pup. Grace lifted her head at the sound of his voice. She didn't growl. Instead, she let out a low, shaky whine, a sound of relief and total surrender. Her eyes, filled with fear and exhaustion, held one final, desperate question. Are we safe now? Dr. Harris knelt, tears stinging his eyes. Yes, girl. You're safe. He approached slowly, letting her sniff his hands. He checked the pup, it was cold and weak but breathing. Grace nudged the pup toward him, a silent plea for medical help. He worked quickly, administering fluids, warming the pup, and treating Grace's cuts and exhaustion. The promise as he worked, a new sound began to filter through the canyon, the distant, unmistakable chop of helicopter blades. They had found them. Dr. Harris looked at Grace. "We have to go." He knew he couldn't outrun a helicopter. He looked at the vast, desolate canyon surrounding them, then back at Grace. He had to make a choice. He pulled out his phone. He couldn't call Linda, as the agents would track the signal. Instead, he pulled up the video recorder. He recorded a short, trembling message, holding up the pup and then Grace's weary but noble face. He recounted everything: Project E9, the microchip, the inhumane experiments, and the government's immediate, aggressive pursuit. "They want to cover this up. They want to turn this mother and her children back into laboratory data, but I won't let them," he whispered to the camera. "If you're watching this, Linda, it means I failed to get them out, but the truth is safe with you. Tell the world." The helicopter noise was deafening now, echoing off the canyon walls. Grace stood up, her body tensing, shielding her child. Dr. Harris knew what he had to do. He found a deep crevice in the rocks, placed the phone with the video and the USB drive inside, and sealed the opening with loose stones. He turned to Grace and smiled, a profound sadness settling on his face. "It's okay, Grace. You already won." He gently lifted the pup and placed it back into Grace's protective grasp. Then, he stepped out from the crevice into the open. As the helicopter landed, kicking up dust and debris, Agent Keller and several armed men jumped out. Dr. Harris stood alone, his hands empty, shielding Grace's hidden sanctuary with his body. "Where's the animal, Doctor?" Keller demanded, his gun drawn. Dr. Harris stood taller, meeting the agent's cold gaze. "She's gone. She escaped into the network of mine tunnels. You won't find her, and you won't find the pup." Keller didn't believe him, but he saw the determination in the doctor's eyes. He ordered his men to sweep the area. They searched for hours, but the intricate, collapsed tunnels of the old quarry offered infinite places to hide. Grace and her last child had vanished. Epilogue. The victory of truth. Weeks later, the intense media coverage began. Linda, having been released after securing a top animal rights attorney, found Dr. Harris's hidden phone, thanks to a small hint he left in his medical records. The video went viral. The international outcry over Project E9 and the government's raid on the animal shelter was immediate and overwhelming. The 5 pups seized by Agent Keller's team were eventually returned to the custody of the shelter after a court battle, recognized not as assets, but as victims of cruel experimentation. Dr. Harris served a brief sentence for obstruction, but was hailed as a hero. Linda became the face of the movement, using Grace's story to shut down any remaining research facilities involved in unauthorized gene splicing. Grace and her final pup were never found by the government. They were believed to be hiding in the wild. But a year later, deep in the protected lands far from the city, a trail camera captured a fleeting, grainy image, a magnificent German shepherd with brilliant amber eyes, accompanied by a smaller, charcoal-gray juvenile with unusually dense fur. Thriving, free, and safe at last. Grace had escaped not just the shelter, but the terrible fate planned for her and her children. She proved that the bond of a mother's love, combined with the courage of those who protected her, was stronger than any secret and more powerful than any weapon. Thank you for following the story of Grace. If you want to see how the returned pups are doing today, let me know.